Well, hello there, and good afternoon, good morning, or even good evening from the United States of America. A nice little beach called Deerfield Beach, to be exact. This is the country where I was born and raised, but I've now lived abroad for around 9 years. As an American, a question that I get really often, both abroad and when I'm back in the United States, is what do you think about the United States? What do you like, and what do you dislike? But since I've already made a video about what I like, which you could watch after this one, in this video, we'll be talking about what I dislike about the United States of America. But one thing that I ask you to keep in mind throughout this video as you're watching it is that this is an apolitical travel video. This is my experience coming back to the country where I was born as a traveler. So while watching, all I ask you to keep in mind is that this video does not have any political agenda, is not in support of any political ideology or anything like that. But with that said, let's go ahead and get into it. And the first thing that I dislike about the United States of America is that it's gotten really expensive. The prices are too high for a lot of things. So when talking about the prices of things in the United States in 2024, I do think it is really important to consider that global inflation has taken its toll on the whole planet. It's not just the US. Prices have gone up everywhere. I mean, there are exceptions to this, like gas is still incredibly cheap compared to most of the world here. But let's just take food as an example. Food has definitely risen in price a ton in the past 10 years. So I mean, there are really a ton of factors at play as to why food has gotten more expensive. Supply chains have changed since COVID, and you just can't deny that a lot of the larger corporations in the United States take a lot of profit from each sale. But to me, visiting here as someone that lives outside of the US, there are two really big factors at play that make everything more expensive here, basically. First off, there's the tipping culture here. It's kind of famous around the world. Everybody knows that currently when you visit the United States, you've got to leave a tip when you go to like a dining establishment or something. But it really goes beyond that. Like I went to Starbucks the other day, and when I was just paying with my card, it prompted me to leave a tip. I don't have any issue at all with giving food service employees more money. I've worked a bunch of different food service jobs, none of which I really enjoyed all that much, except maybe being a barista. But why should such a massive and profitable company like Starbucks leave their employees to having to ask for tips? I mean, the federal minimum wage in this country is $7.25. In Germany, it's somewhere around double that. But the thing about that is that Germany is a much cheaper country to live in, and there are better workers' protections as well. So just having a higher minimum wage here in the United States that would guarantee that anybody working at a Starbucks full-time could actually pay their rent and lead a relatively comfortable life and take a few vacation days every now and then, for me would be a really big upgrade for this country. So it's really not just the fact that the prices of a lot of things are higher in this country than they were before, but the fact that it's hard for a lot of people to afford those things. And another thing that goes along with the tipping culture here are the fees that can be attached to all different kinds of things here, just kind of inserted into somewhere in a way that you might not always even notice if you don't read the bill that well. But I think the most obvious case of this is when mostly bigger hotel chains will add what they call like a resort fee or sometimes experience fee. There's a bunch of different ways that they phrase it, but that kind of thing, so fees that feel hidden, you don't know it when you're originally planning to buy a good or service, I really don't like that about the US. There's just a lot of that. And when we're discussing the prices of things, this applies more to people living long-term in the US because it has to do with education. Basically, going to college, university here is just outrageously expensive. I actually just finished my master's degree in Germany, and the tuition fee was not $10,000, not $5,000, not even $1. I paid €0 for tuition fee because in many public German universities, that are quite good by the way, there are no tuition fees. The thing is, a lot of people don't know that this used to be the case at public universities in the United States too. My undergraduate is from the City College of New York. And the thing is, if you go back, I guess 50 years or whatever, they didn't have a tuition fee either. Of course, with education, there's always the question of where does the money come from? And yes, in Germany, the taxes can be higher than in the United States of America. But then again, here, even at public universities, there are a lot of extra costs involved and like private companies involved as well. I mean, in Germany, the experience you'll have as a college student, master's student, is definitely different than here, but it's also working quite well there. I mean, are there lessons to be taken from Germany or perhaps other European countries or other countries around the world? about how to make education more accessible and more affordable to people, I'll leave that up to you to decide. That's what this video is about. But after my experience in higher education in both of these countries, I can say for sure that I dislike how it is in the US. And another thing that I dislike over here in the US is how the transportation network is set up. You rely a lot on flights, and the flight network is strong. It's basically the strongest in the world, actually. But the thing is, it's compensating for a lack of other good transportation options, at least in my view. I mean, over here, the car culture is definitely really strong. But unfortunately, that also means that the traffic culture is really strong. So, I don't know. I worked as a public school teacher for a year in Washington, D.C. and commuted from Virginia. Took me about 3 hours round trip every single day sitting in traffic. But honestly, I don't think Washington, D.C. is even the greatest of examples here. There is like a metro system there. I could take the train sometimes, though it didn't time that well. Often was canceled or delayed and that kind of stuff. But you know, the average person is not just gonna go hop in a private plane or a chopper and commute to work or something like that. So for me, what I really dislike about transportation here is basically the lack of public transportation options. I mean, there are rural parts of the country where it might be hard to actually set up good public transportation. They could probably add like a daily bus or something like that. In much of Europe, you have that kind of thing. Like in rural areas, people probably do need their own vehicle. But when you get into more populated areas, whether it be suburbs or a city, the public transportation here is just, in my opinion, it's not good enough when you compare it to other countries that are actually less wealthy than the United States, like, I don't know, the United Kingdom. And I mean, as a personal side note, from my view, driving in a car is statistically more dangerous than taking a train. I mean, even in the United States' strongest public transport system in New York City, a lot of the time the trains are not that reliable these days. And the really high cost of living can mean that you have to actually move like way outside of New York City into New Jersey or somewhere deep into wherever where the public transportation is not as strong. So just reflecting on the way that I've experienced public transport systems, not only in Europe, to be honest, I mean also in Asia. I mean, getting between and around cities in like Japan or China is just a lot more simple than it is here in the US. But I guess in the end, after 9 years abroad, what I personally just dislike when I come over to the US in terms of transport is sitting in traffic for hours on end when I know that this country has enough wealth to construct better public transport systems. And another thing that I think this country has more than enough wealth to deal with successfully, and seems to me like it's probably the biggest thing that this country really could deal with a whole lot better, is the homelessness crisis. I mean, the exact number of people that go without a roof over their head in this country this year is at least around 600,000 on average per day. But really, that is a difficult thing to get accurate statistics on, and likely the number is significantly higher. And while in this country you do have some of the highest paying jobs in the world, workers' rights are often very lacking. And having worked here a lot myself, I can contest that there are very difficult workplaces here, and the chance of losing a job is a very real thing. When you lose your job, then there's the chance that you might lose your home. But I mean, the United States of America is often referred to as the land of plenty. It's the wealthiest country in the history of humankind, depending on how you look at it. To put it very simply, here more than anywhere else in the world, the number of people experiencing homelessness could easily be zero. There's the wealth here to do that overnight. But I do want to be really clear, because if I'm not, it can just sound like the US is 100% a really horrible, cruel place. That's not what I'm trying to say here. Though the context is different, there are many other countries around the world that have big issues with homelessness at the moment. But just to take an example from where I currently live in Germany, if you've worked a certain amount and then you lose your job in Germany, you have the right to be paid, I think it's around 67% of your salary for an entire year while you search for a new job. This is simply seen as a mandatory insurance policy that anybody working in Germany just has to pay into. And then on top of that, if after that year goes by you cannot find employment, you can still receive a smaller amount of money from the government, as well as have your rent covered. But there is one thing besides the hire and fire culture here that Germany doesn't grapple with as much either. There is an opioid epidemic in this country. And I mean, think about this for a second. How does drug addiction work? Anybody familiar with the topic is going to tell you that you're most at risk of becoming addicted to opioids when you're having hard times. It's also the case that private drug companies have marketed deadly opioids to people on TV even, which I really dislike also. I mean, I can't really imagine anyone who would want to turn on their TV and then see an advertisement for a pharmaceutical product. So in the end, we're talking about thousands of livelihoods and lives lost to both homelessness and the opioid epidemic. Over in Canada, the average life expectancy is a little over 81 years. Here in the US, it's currently a little over 78 years. It's almost a 3-year difference despite there being similar cultures and even similar populations in the two countries. And I'm not here to try and say that one country is better than the other. That is not the case. I've traveled to over 70 countries. That's definitely not the case. But Canada has a public healthcare system. It guarantees everybody their human right to healthcare. And on top of that, they have found ways to deal with the opioid crisis that's been more effective than in the United States. So I mean, take the information that I'm sharing with you here as you want. That is the whole point of this video. But having traveled all around this country, I can say for sure that the current crises are not avoidable whether you're visiting or living in the United States of America. And I do just want to quickly point out to you that everything that I make a point of including in my travel videos in terms of data is a verified fact. But regardless of that, I am not a journalist. I am a traveler as well as a content creator. And I always encourage you to verify any information that you get online with official sources. And of course, times have changed a lot recently with how we get our information, particularly with social media giving everybody and anybody a voice, no matter if you're the president of a country or somebody in their basement at 4 a.m. eating a bag of Doritos. And I'm not saying New York Times or Wall Street Journal reporters can't like Doritos too, but I do think you get my point. But what can I say? So many livelihoods and lives lost to homelessness and the connected opioid epidemic are just things that I dislike about this country, the things that I hate. Hold up, this is not Deerfield Beach anymore. We're not in Kansas, Dorothy. No, I'm just playing. What happened is, I got pretty worked up talking about those last two topics, and that cable just came out of the camera a little bit and completely destroyed my audio. So we're just gonna do the end of this video from another country halfway across the world. And if you happen to know which country I'm in, then let us know in the comments. But regardless of where I am, there are a few more things that I do happen to dislike about the United States that I thought would make sense to include in this video. And the next thing that I want to talk about is more of a cultural phenomenon, at least as I see it. Basically, in the US, when you sit down and have a chat about traveling to another place or maybe even visiting a nearby state or a nearby city or, I don't know, some nature within the domestic United States, often you can find yourself confronted with a response that's kind of drenched in fear. Basically, for pretty much all of my adult life, I found myself having tons of interactions with Americans, friends, random people, family members, whatever, where I talked about traveling to another country or doing something in general, even within the US, that could just be perceived as dangerous or something to be scared of, basically. Of course, it goes without saying that sometimes a little fear is probably healthy. Kids should probably be scared of touching the flames of the fireplace. But I'm talking about stuff that is a little bit less logical, at least from the view of someone that's experienced a lot of that kind of stuff. So, let me just take an example, and I think it will be a little bit more clear what I'm referring to. About 11 years ago, I had decided to book some flight tickets and venture on down to the beautiful country of Peru. And, I had some friends down there and some other acquaintances that had agreed to kind of show me the ropes. Plus, I was studying Spanish at the time, so I thought it would be the perfect opportunity to get a little bit better at speaking my second language. And to just give it a little more context, at the time, Peru was considered neither a safe nor dangerous country to visit. So I was really excited for the trip, and I told a lot of different people about it. I got a lot of different responses, but one in particular is very memorable. Oh, and by the way, US Embassy over there, maybe that'll help you guess. Drop it in the comments. But what happened during that particularly memorable conversation basically went like, I told that person about why I was visiting Peru, why I was excited, all that kind of stuff. And the only response that I got was a very skeptical response that just kind of kept reiterating how Latin America is dangerous. And really, even today, when I continue to encounter that kind of thing, which is not just an American thing, like people around the world, especially those who haven't traveled to the place that they're talking about in a conversation, naturally might have some fear, particularly where the place being talked about happens to be in the media, let's say for all the wrong reasons, which is unfortunately very often the case. There are lots of misunderstood countries and regions around the world, and I guess I'd say I'm actually in one of those regions right now. But in the case of my little example about my conversation about Peru, I guess the thing that I dislike the most about that conversation, looking back on it, is the fact that the person that I was talking to just wouldn't have had the chance to really consider the benefits of visiting Peru or my reasons for wanting to visit the country. And I mean, this was all basically just because they perceived something as foreign and therefore felt that they had to fear it or at least not trust it. And unfortunately, at least in my view, in my experience, I do find that this is a pretty common way of thinking in the United States of America. At the same time, I want to be really fair to the United States of America because there are some things that are perhaps misunderstood about the country outside of the country. I mean, I do find that this kind of fear of things that are perceived as foreign is pretty commonplace, but at the same time, one thing that I often hear abroad about the US that's just not really accurate is that nobody in the United States has a passport. It's just not true. Pretty close to 50% of Americans actually do hold a passport. Just one little example, but I suppose that also means that somewhere along the way, some people that have experienced that kind of fear that I've been talking about are able to get out of it and travel outside of the US or even just to other states in the US as well. And one more thing that I do dislike about the United States is how things can become politicized all too quick. In fact, both of the major political parties in the United States have thoroughly weaponized a lot of the topics that we've looked at today. Now, don't get me wrong. Free democratic elections are the bedrock of what I like about the US and what makes it a good place. But basically, all politicians are corrupt all around the world. They'll do just about anything for power and money. Now, this video did end up becoming slightly more of a rant than what I'd originally intended, but when you're talking about a place that you love and the things that you dislike about it, things can get a little bit heated. Do keep in mind, these are just some of the things that I dislike about the US, just like in that video that I made about stuff that I do like in the US. I didn't cover every single little thing or anything like that. This is not a comprehensive list, but I do hope that you enjoyed watching it, and definitely leave comments if you have any thoughts on any of the topics that I've addressed. If you did like it, make sure to give it a like, subscribe to my channel for many more travel videos, and I'll see you all in the next video. Thank you so much for watching.